Hello, this is Dominic Candeloro, and we're coming to you from Casa, Italia, and with the co-sponsorship of the Italian American Studies Association, we're presenting a Zoom on Italian American servicemen in World War II Italy. And we're lucky to have today Matteo Pretelli, who is who with his partner has created a book that won a prize at the Organization of American Historians for being the best book on American history published in a language other than English. And it was published in Italian. It's called Soldati e Patrie, and it's by Matteo Pretelli and Francesco Fusi. And I was very pleased to see the notice in the Organization of American Historians that my friend Matteo had won the prize along with his co-author. And I called him up and I said, when is it going to be in English? And he said, well, they didn't have any plans. They were looking for resources. And I said, well, can't someone, well, we thought about ways to do it. We thought, well, maybe we can do a fundraiser. Maybe we can do a fundraiser as a way of getting some money to do the translation. And then I thought also, this has been a passion of mine. I've always wondered what happened to people like my uncles who went into the service, became GIs, and what happens if they go to Italy? And who do they want to shoot the Italians? Do they want to find their relatives? What were their? Could they use the language? Was there any jealousy among them from the Italians? Or were they jealous of the Italians? I don't know. Whatever. I wondered about that, the mix of actions and motivations. And so we decided to do this Zoom, and Casa Italia had a very successful Zoom a few months ago when we did Joseph Tusiani, a Zoom based on the work of Joseph Tusiani, and we got some really good feedback from it. So we're here today to fulfill all of those expectations, and I think you'll find it as stimulating as I will. Professor Matteo Pretelli is Associate Professor of History of North America at the University of Naples, Orientale. His extensive scholarship focuses on Italian diaspora, transnational fascism, the intersection between Italy and the United States, and especially the servicemen, American servicemen in World War II today, in World War II in Italy. And Matteo and Francesco put together an exhibit a while back, and maybe you can tell us more and show us some stuff from that exhibit on Italian-American soldiers in World War II. So we have a lot waiting for us. And also with us today are Peter Belmonte. He's a retired U.S. Air Force officer, and he's a military historian specializing in Italian-American military history in World War I. And he has written a half a dozen books on various aspects of soldiers in World War I, World War II. Our other commentator is a very old friend of mine. I mean, he's old. He's not that old, but he's, as far as being a friend, he's one of my oldest friends, Gary R. Mormino, he's a Duckwell Professor of History Emeritus at the Florida Studies Program at the University of South Florida. So uh, Gary had a previous life doing Italian American studies, and he's especially interested in World War II as far as Italian Americans are concerned. And we'll talk to Gary in a little bit. We want this to be as interactive as possible and as conversational as possible. I'll ask frequent questions. Some of them will be intelligent questions, and some of them will be irrelevant questions. So I promise you variety. Anyhow, Matteo, we're so pleased to have you, and I was so excited to see that you and Francesco had won the prize. The Organization of American Historians is really the top group of American historians in the U.S., and this prize is very prestigious. And to say that your book was the best book about American history written in a non-English language for that year was really impressive. And I said, now I got to see that book. And I don't know, I'm not that good in Italian. I need to have an English translation. But hey, tell us about the core question. What was the experience of Italian American GIs in their time in Italy during World War II in the 1940s? What were all the aspects of it, and how did it impact the larger movement of Italian Americans forward through the World War II experience? And, well, carry on, Matteo. We're really pleased to have you, and we're really honored too.
Okay, Dominic, first let me thank you for this very generous presentation and for your generosity to have have me in this for this lecture in front of this audience. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you, even though from remote. So thank you everyone for participating to my talk, and thank you of course to Gary Mormino and Peter Belmonte, especially because they have been quite inspirative to my work over time. So I'm very pleased to have them here. As you may hear, I'm not a native speaker, so I hope to be understandable enough. If you don't understand what I'm saying, please just raise your hand and tell me, please rephrase your comments and words, and I'm happy to try to be as comprehensible as possible. You asked me about the GIs. We should rather say the Italian American servicemen, because generally speaking, Italian Americans have been part of the warfare, the American warfare, even being part of the aviation or the infantry or the Navy. Just think about the Marines. So in that sense, the book I and Francesco Frusi, my research partner, tried to write down after more or less 10 years of research, was trying to recount this multifaceted and quite interesting story. You know, when you talk about people who fought in World War II, you really talk about the core of the Italian American history. I really think that World War II was a watershed for the history of Italians in the United States. So I'm pretty sure that everyone in the audience or from remote have someone who fought in World War II. So it's definitely something that touch everyone, more or less. We count pretty much 17 millions of Italian Americans right now. I guess a good part have relatives who had fought in that specific war. Just let me tell you something, some background information about our research. We have been asked in, if I'm not wrong, 2013 by the Institute, the Tuscan Institute for Contemporary Research, to run a research over the Tuscans that were abroad and have been taking part of the Allied effort against the Nazis, the fascists, and the Japanese. But after a while, we realized that was not possible to just concentrate and focus on the Tuscans. So we decided to enlarge our picture. And enlarging that picture means to bring into the core, every single Italian American who took part to the war, but not only Italian Americans, because we did also included other allied soldiers, such as the Canadians, the Italian Canadians, the Italian Brazilians, the Italian Britons, and the Italian Australians. But of course, the Italian Americans were predominant in numbers, so we were very happy to focus specifically on that specific ethnic group. And you may know you have to start from something. And we started from basic literature, so works from Gary's and Peter's that are present today were quite inspirative to our research that we try to analyze over time. If you watch, if you see our book, you may realize how it's a 600 pages book, and 1/3 is composed of notes, of endnotes. That means we did concentrate and focus on a great variety of sources. So ethnic press, archival resources, oral interviews, or even interviewing the sons and daughters of those who has fought in World War II, but eventually they passed away. Unfortunately, when we started our research, many had already died, so we didn't have the chance, as Peter did, to interview so many veterans. So I'm very jealous about the possibility that Peter had over time. Just to help you out to understand what I'm trying to say, I just want to share, if you like, have a number of pictures to watch. Can you see them?
See.
Yes, we can. See.
Okay, fantastic. Right here on the left, you may find the cover of our book. I'm in love with this picture, a U.S. Navy Italian American who was taking in his arms a little Italian. That says a lot about the sort of relationship that happened between the occupiers, or if you prefer, the liberators, so the Americans, and the Italian population. It's something that I'm trying to touch down today. I've been asked to talk for a quite long lecture, but please feel free to jump into the conversation anytime you want. So just please raise your hand or just talk, and I'm happy to answer any comment or question that you have. You were basically already introducing the core questions that I'm trying to touch down. What kind of impact World War II had on Italian Americans? How Italian Americans perceived the war, especially in Italy, and what kind of relationship Italian American servicemen had with the Italian population. So this is just a part of the story. Because as you may know, Italian Americans at large were fighting everywhere in the world. We have people fighting in the Pacific, in North Africa, in Europe in general, in Italy, and so on. So it's a long story to be, it's a large story to be recounted, and I'm mostly concentrated on the battle during the campaign of Italy, for the simple reason that, for an Italian American fighting in Italy was a sensitive issue, an emotional issue as well. As you may know, the campaign of Italy started July the 10th, 1943, by the landing of the Allies from North Africa up to Sicily. And from that moment onwards, the Allies moved up north, trying to liberate the entire peninsula. That eventually happened the 25th April 1945, the full liberation of Italy, to which Italian Americans contribute at large. So I'm just trying to say something about that. But in order to understand the Italian-American experience in World War II, we have to talk a bit about the interwar period when Italian-Americans were somehow fascinated by the Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. So you may know why these people could have some sort of fascination for a dictator. You are an Italian American, you live in the United States, you mostly vote for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, so for the Democrats. But at the very same time, you appreciate Mussolini. There are some basic reasons behind that. First, non-Italian Americans were particularly fascinated by Mussolini. The Americans believed that Mussolini was a good man for Italy because Italians were perceived somehow as a chaotic country, an anarchoid country that needed someone strong to rule the full nation. So in other words, we appreciated the Mussolini's masculinity, the virility of the man, and the fact that he was strongly anti-communist. So in that sense, Italian Americans reacted positively to Mussolini for the simple reason that Americans loved Mussolini. Never forget how many Italian Americans were subject to prejudice, to anti-Italianism. So having someone who was respected as a powerful Italian was seen by many Italian Americans as somehow an ethnic way of reaffirming the Italian character, the Italianità. So, in other words, many Italian Americans were fascinated with Mussolini and appreciated Mussolini, even supporting him during the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. But, of course, the war happened. The war happened and Pearl Harbor happened December the 7th, 1941. At that time was absolutely necessary to have a reaction, to have a response to a sneak attack led by the Japanese. What was the reaction of the Italian-American communities? Was mostly to be pretty much pro-American and supporting the United States. But this was not enough, because at the very beginning, when Pearl Harbor happened and Mussolini declared war on the United States, 4 days afterwards, December the 11th, the reaction of the American authorities was pretty harsh against the Italians. It's a story that you may know, but don't forget how those who were still Italian subjects, so they were still holding the Italian citizenship, had been pretty much deprived of their own private liberties. They were limited. So just for making an example, if you lived in California, you could not freely move and you could be evacuated from the Western coast because of the fear of spying or un-American activities. And a minority of Italian Americans have been even detained in special detention centers, detention camps, not at the same amount such as the Japanese, but, you know, a few hundreds of them have been interned over time. It's a long story that has been recounted, as you may know, back in the 1990s by Lawrence Di Stasi, who organized a very beautiful exhibit that was also published in a book and recounted for the very first time the sort of limitation of liberties to which many Italian Americans have been subject. You could not even speak Italian at that time, you know, because you could be considered an American speaking in Italian. So everyone had to turn to be pretty much American by only speaking English. Now, this is a part of the story. Yes,
please. Can I
please.
interrupt here? Two things that relate me to this. My father was an enemy alien and had to register for it. In fact, throughout the World War II, my father was battling deportation and had to appear before the immigration judges half a dozen times, and my mother had to testify that if my father were deported, she would or would not go with him. She decided that she indeed would not go with him if he were deported to Italy during the war. And as far as the Storia Segreta, I can remember at the American Italian Historical Association meetings, we'd hear papers from people from the West Coast chapters by Di Stasi and others about this and how hard it was, how ashamed the Italians who lived through it were at the treatment that was given to them during World War II in California.
Mm-hmm.
So we can really relate to this kind of negative start to World War II for Italian Americans.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, your family story is exemplary of what happened to many Italian Americans who had to defend themselves and to prove to be 100% Americans. So that's the reason why probably many Italian Americans decided to fight as volunteers, despite the fact probably the majority had been drafted during the wartime. Indeed, let's say that to be patriotic could be definitely an issue for many Italian Americans. And this is given especially by the fact that we do have a very, very large number of Italian Americans of second generation who has been drafted in wartime. I just give you some figures that we found from the sources, is because it's not easy to track ethnicity within the military forces. But as you may see, Italian Americans, according to some sources, were pretty much close to 1 million. So 850,000 people, including 40,000 aliens. So people who were not Americans yet, but they decided to join the American forces to fight against fascism in Europe, or the Japanese, or even for getting the American citizenship. These are second generation people, and you may compare to the other groups, to the other allied groups. Italians in the British forces, or the Canadians, the Australians, or the Brazilians were not so predominant such as in the American forces. So some scholars say that Italian Americans were the largest ethnic group within the American forces. So this is very relevant to be studied. When you study history, you have to touch down a phenomena that can be quantitatively interesting enough. And these people were trying to prove their patriotism together with, the other, I don't have another picture. Okay, it doesn't matter. Together with, the Little Italy's at large. The majority of people within the Italian-American communities wanted to prove their own patriotism. If you see this picture taken from the Progresso Italo-Americano, that was the most circulating Italian newspaper at that time, just show how, two ladies wanted to show in front of a camera how Americans they felt. So everyone who was left behind on the home front, women, children, and so on, were taking the charge of being part of this patriotic drive for the final victory of the United States, such as by purchasing war bonds or saving raw materials, paper, or whatever else. So everyone was part of the game to fight against the enemies of the United States.
Matteo, tell me a little bit about the research with Il Progresso. Is it and the role of Il Progresso in the World War II period?
Well, actually, we scrutinize every single day from 1941 up to 1945. So we have a full scrutiny of the newspaper. And that was particularly interesting because the Progresso, such as other ethnic newspapers were particularly paying attention to those who were fighting overseas. They had sections specifically dedicated to servicemen who were sending their letters, or they communicated the names of those who had been wounded or killed in action, or taken as prisoners, or returning back home. So war was everywhere on the ethnic press. And we didn't concentrate only on the Progresso Italo-Americano, because we wanted also to scrutinize other newspapers, such as La Voce Coloniale in New Orleans, or even others. You know, the ethnic press is one of the best sources to study migration, and definitely is fundamental to study those who fought in World War II. And in particular, you may realize from these sort of sources what kind of people we are talking about. Okay, who were the guys who fought in World War II? They were mostly second-generation Italian Americans whose parents or grandparents had come from the United States, had come from Italy, born pretty much back in the 20s, born and raised in the United States. So they were full American citizens. They could speak fluent English, unlikely me, but they were also pretty much embedded into the American culture. They liked to go to the movie theater to watch Hollywood movies. They liked the hamburgers. They liked baseball and so on. But at the very same times, they were also somehow Italian cultural oriented. They liked pasta. They were Catholic. They spoke sometimes some sort of dialects or even standard Italian. So they were a sort of hybrid. They were in between the two countries, but the majority of them was not well aware of Italy, because they could have arrived from Italy in a very slight minority, but the majority and never visit Italy. So Italy was a fairy tale recounted by their relatives. They didn't know anything about Italy, so they could discover Italy by serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. So these were mostly who these people were, mostly Americans with an Italian cultural traits that could be reinforced and empowered by fighting in World War II. And in particular, why these people decided to fight? The very basic question is the majority of them have been drafted. So they had to do that. If you are an American, you have to fight. No question about it. But some of them could even decide to enlist as volunteers. Never forget how after Pearl Harbor, many men decided to volunteer in order to revenge what happened by the attack of the Japanese. Italian Americans could have specific reasons in joining the U.S. Armed Forces. First, rejection of bigotry. I'm an Italian, I'm proud of it, be Italian. Italians have been subject to deprivation of their private liberties, so I want to revenge this feeling, and I want to show to the rest of Americans how patriotic I am. This is definitely a main point to be counted down. The decision to be part of the game to defend democracy at large. So I feel American, I like to live in a democracy, so I want to defeat totalitarianism all over the world, especially in Italy. You know, Italians have been subject for 20 years to fascism. Pretty much, I want to be part of the game in order to liberate Italy. And of course, you are a young guy, okay? You are in your 20s. For you, fighting can be also a matter of adventurism. I can go everywhere in the world. I can go to Asia. I can go to all Europe. I can even go to Italy. I mean, who cares if I have to fight? I'm discovering the world. Just think about a generation of people who were mostly focused and concentrated on the little Italies, on the ethnic neighborhoods. So they had not so much chance to experience the world. And war for them was definitely an experience.
Matteo,
Yes.
was there an effort by the Army to channel Italian Americans into services, or maybe into the Navy or something, or into the Asian fronts, instead of allowing them to go to Italy, or having them avoid sending Italians to Italy? Was there an effort at that? And did the Italians themselves choose not to go to places or to enlist in ways that would end them up in Italy?
Dominic, this is a very good question, because for a very long time I see scholarship who tended to reiterate this idea that the Italians asked to go to the Pacific in order to avoid any service in Italy, because you know, you don't want to fight against Italians because you can meet relatives over there, you can meet friends, especially if you left Italy and you arrived to the United States, you may still have family over there. I do think, or better, I and Francesco realized that probably this is not completely true. I mean, for sure, someone could have decided to join the Marines, especially going to the Pacific, in order to avoid any service in Europe and in particular in Italy. But we made a sort of a quantitative analysis on those who has been killed, and we took the names from the Progresso Italo-Americano and matched their data with the data collected from the veteran databases of the American government. And we realized that mostly we collected 50 hundreds names of Italian Americans and infos, and the majority of them has been deployed in Europe rather than in the Pacific. So in other words, you know, this is a limited pattern, a limited sample to be utilized, but just give you an idea that not necessarily these people could be deployed in the Pacific, because, you know, the armed forces could decide to assign people everywhere they like it. And not necessarily the first choice by the American authorities was to post these people in the Pacific. So my answer to you will be not necessarily. And some of them, some Italian Americans could have asked to go to the Pacific, but I will not say was a general pattern. The majority was drafted and was going everywhere, was sent, and many of them were in Europe. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. And, you know, okay, patriotism. Patriotism is definitely an issue that has to be taken into account in our story. It's something that Peter in particular has already analyzed in his great book, because he took a number of interviews, if I'm not wrong, 50 or something, of Italian American veterans who pretty much recount their story through the prism of patriotism. So I want to be a patriotic guy. You know, I just wrote down here a quotation from a book, a memoir by Ben Savelli, who was a GI from San Francisco, who easily explained how everyone in his family was part of the game and fighting for the United States. So everyone was giving his part or her part for fighting for the United States. So you can read by yourself, but Savelli pretty much says that we were one of the most patriotic families we could be, because we wanted to be patriotic. And patriotism is definitely the main important issue that you may find in stories of Italian Americans collected on veteran oral projects or in memoirs. So patriotism is definitely something to be recounted. Talking about patriotism means to rely in particular to one of the most famous Italian American servicemen at the time, that you may see here depicted in the cover of the Progresso Italo-Americano, Sergeant John Basilone, that you, as you may know, was awarded the U.S. Congress Medal of Honor for his services, for his heroic services in the Pacific. You know, Basilone was an Italian American from Raritan, New Jersey, a small town in New Jersey. It was part of a typical Italian American family. He had something like 6 or 7 siblings, so a very sizable Italian American family, an ordinary family, and Indeed, he liked to depict himself as an ordinary American, but he was also an ordinary ethnic American, an Italian American. After he was getting back to the United States for his war merits, he was receiving the Medal of Honor, and he was used by the American authorities to run a campaign for purchasing war bonds. So he was pretty much a promoter of war bonds all across the United States. Now, Basilone is very interesting, I think, because his myth is still present today. Just watch, please, this slide. You may know how Basilone is depicted as a sort of a masculine American hero in New Jersey, in Raritan, his hometown. You may see his picture right here in the middle. So every year, a John Basilone parade is organized, and not only Italian Americans participate in that. So everyone who is particularly close to the myth of John Basilone is participating to this event. But more importantly, maybe, Basilone is still alive in the American in the American popular culture. And you may see, for instance, in a TV miniseries, The Pacific, that was created a few years ago, a war TV miniseries created by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. You know, Basilone in The Pacific is one of the main characters. He's depicted as an American hero. So it's something that is very present. The Pacific was a very successful blockbuster TV miniseries. Or just coming to the current days, if you jump to Netflix right now, even today, you may see how there is a TV miniseries titled Boots that talks about a gay Marine. And pretty much it's interesting that in one of the episodes, pretty much Marines are educated to the myth of John Basilone, because he was perceived as the most iconic Marine that you may have. So even today, even back in the 90s, the TV miniseries was set in the 90s, Basilone was present into the American mythology of Marines. So Basilone is definitely someone important for the Italian-American experience at large. And now, still talking about patriotism, if you read the memoirs, or if you read, the ethnic press, you may realize how Italian Americans wanted to be perceived as full-fledged American patriotic by pretty much internalizing every single decision undertaken by the American government. So veterans, Italian American veterans, has not been very critical against the US government about what happened during World War II. Just to make an example, if you read the memoirs or the or you listen to the oral interviews, pretty much every single Italian American justified the fact that the American bombed Germany or Japan by using the atomic bomb. So you don't contest that narrative because you pretty much want to be perceived as an American. And at the very same times, the Italian Americans utilized the derogatory terms to identify the Germans or the Japanese, talking about them as Krauts and Japs. And in talking about Japs, they tended to revenge their own whiteness. We are part of American white mainstream. We are part of this society. So we tend to have derogatory terms against, the Asians, in particular, the Japanese.
Matteo,
Yes.
was there any negative slang that the Army or the U.S. Army used to describe their Italian enemies? Or I don't know.
Enemies, or to
Or the
describe
Italian soldiers, were they the Tonys or?
Look, talking about stereotypes and prejudice, we may say that the Americans tended to look at the Italian soldiers as cowards because they have been defeated everywhere. As you may know, the Italians has been massively defeated in North Africa, and the Allies took thousands of Italians as prisoners of war very quickly. They tended not to fight that tough. So in other words, the Americans tended to look at the Italians as not very good soldiers. But, there is a fantastic essay written by Thomas Guglielmo a few years ago that recount the story of Italians perceived negatively as soldiers, but considered positively as persons. They are friendly, they are lovers, they are people who are pretty much pro-American. So they are two sides of the same coin. Bad soldiers, someone that cannot be trusted so much by a military point of view, but positive people on the other side. But it's also interesting to see how Italian Americans has not been subject to stereotypes. That means that pretty much they have been considered as, white Americans that could be considered part of the story, part of the effort to win the war. It's something that you definitely see in Hollywood. During my research, during our research, we watched a number of American movies in which there is an Italian American depicted as a character. It's quite interesting to see how the Italian Americans is very often present into the so-called multi-ethnic platoon. Hollywood used a narrative to describe the just war. There was a multi-ethnic platoon led by a white guy who wanted to depict the sort of multi-ethnic America, so the American mosaic. So everyone was depicted inside. You have the Italian American soldier, the Jewish soldier, the Irish, the guy coming from West, and so on. This sort of narrative always describe the presence of Italian Americans. And if you watch movies produced during World War II and immediately after the end of the war, many movies have a sort of, let's say, stereotypical and folkloristic representation of the Italian American. Such this example right here. The guy that you find on the right is Private Regazzi, an Italian American depicted in a very famous war movie, The Sands of Iwo Jima, a 1949 movie starring John Wayne as the leader of the multi-ethnic platoon. But Ben Ragazzi is part of the game. And he's always internalized some sort of stereotypes that usually Hollywood associate to the Italians. So the soldier is very often drunk, is a Latin lover, is in love with every woman passing through, is a very buffoonish guy, but quite important, is always a patriotic American. So you can describe Italian Americans in Hollywood movies, in Hollywood, the war movies, as a funny guy, stereotypical guy, folkloristic guy, but at the very end, the Italian American is always patriotic. That means you are part of our team, despite the fact you are a little bit different. Stereotypization fade away after a while. If you watch movies back in since the 1960s onwards, the Italian character, the Italian folkloristic character has gone pretty much. So you have the difficulties in recognizing Italian Americans. You can only doing that by the name of the character or the fact that he brings a crucifix or something like that. But the Italian character fade away after a while.
Yeah, a comment about Frank Sinatra and From Here to Eternity.
Yes, that's another part of the story. Frank Sinatra is always depicted somehow as the Italian American. He gets drunk, he fights, but eventually he's a patriotic guy as well. So in other words, he reiterates this sort of dual representation of the Italian. He's someone good, but still stereotypical. And he tried to defend himself when the sergeant, don't remember the name of the sergeant, tried to describe him as a little monkey or a little Mussolini. So he tried to react. But this sort of reaction just brings the idea that, Italians can be very, very much impulsive somehow. Mm-hmm. But at the very end, Joe DiMaggio as well in that movie is a positive character. He's discriminated at the very end, but he's a positive guy and he's patriotic for sure. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. Just trying to arrive to Italy, if you don't mind. You know, let's try to say something about the experience in Italy because I think it's quite relevant. How many Italian Americans fought during the campaign of Italy? My answer is I don't know because it's not easy to track the ethnicity of these guys. So probably there were thousands, but I don't have an exact number. I can only tell you that we checked for people who have been killed in action and eventually buried in the two American war cemeteries that we have in Italy. So the one is in Florence, where I'm now, and the other one is in Nettuno, pretty much close to Rome. And we identify by matching the names with the veteran database, pretty much less than 250 soldiers, mostly GIs. Not surprisingly, they were mostly coming from New Jersey and New York. It's quite common, you know. These people mostly came from this part of the world. Low level of education, they were not so much educated. They were coming from the working class, okay? Especially working into factories and works like that. So nothing particularly
Did did they have high school education or in 1940? I would say it might be 50-50.
Well, I cannot recall right now the percentage, but a part of them could have a high school diploma, but I do remember part of them had quitted before they completed their studies, even because they had been drafted. So, you know,
Yeah.
part of them could not have a full education, but let's say that the majority would not have a full diploma from high school. And even from the university, the degree, the rate of people having a university degree was pretty low. And it's not surprising because at that time, not so many Italian Americans could afford to go to the university. So that was our perception. And, you know, pretty much the choice to be part of the war in the Italian campaign was, as we have said at the very beginning, somehow influenced by the decision. I mean, some of them could not be that happy to fight in Italy because they were scared to fight the Italians. So this is something we have already touched on, so I'm not saying anything more about that. But it's very interesting to say that these people, when called to fight in Italy, could undertake actions that could be very unpleasant, such as, for instance, bombing the Italian villages or towns from where their relatives came from. It's the case of a soldier who was called to bomb the town of Maresca in the north, in the Apennines in Tuscany. Maresca was the town from where his relatives were coming from. So he asked to be exempted, to be waived from that action. But the military authorities, his military officers said, no, we cannot create a precedent. So you have to take action on that. And unpleasantly, he had to bomb the city of his relatives. So you may realize how fighting in Italy was not very easy, time by time.
But do you think it's an exception to the experience?
I didn't find any experience, so they have to undertake the duty, even to bomb or to fight with anyone. So no exception at all. It's not. I didn't find any exception at all.
So they never made a rule, but did you find instances where Italian American soldiers were faced with that choice?
Well, they had to face their choice, but eventually they decided to undertake the actions because you have to follow orders, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I didn't find anyone who said, no, I don't want to do that and being punished for that. So it seems like everyone was taking action. It may have happened, but I cannot tell you because I never found any proof of that.
Weren't there certain decisions made somewhere by some of the maybe higher officers that certain artistic places would be avoided in the bombing?
That's actually something that I wanted to say because we do have a great example in our history. Unfortunately, I don't know if you are aware of the existence of the Monte Cassino's Abbey. Monte Cassino is a place in between Naples and Rome. Monte Cassino was actually a jewel, a medieval jewel of Christendom, an abbey, a fantastic abbey, up to the hill, so you could dominate the entire valley over there. We were in a situation in which the Americans were moving northbound and they wanted to overcome the line controlled by the Nazis. The Monte Cassino's Abbey was considered as a shelter for the Nazis by the American authorities. So it was decided to sacrifice the Monte Cassino's Abbey for military purposes. And the decision, if you jump on YouTube, you may realize how Monte Cassino was drastically destroyed over that time. So a jewel of Christendom was completely destroyed and eventually reconstructed after the war. Generally speaking, the Allied military authorities tended to privilege the the military objective, the military priorities, such as in Monte Cassino. But we also have some exceptions that happened over time. For instance, Rome, the Vatican was decided not to be bombed because Rome was bombed in the neighborhood of San Lorenzo, close to the main train station. But it was accurately decided not to bomb close to the Vatican because that could be perceived as a very tragic event for the Italian population and Christendom at large. So I will reply that generally speaking, they tended to prioritize the military objectives, and secondly, to save places dear to artistic, to art, and important by an artistic point of view. Did I answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So it's quite interesting to see how, being a patriotic guy fighting in Italy, it's interesting because you always accept decision undertaken by the military officers, including Monte Cassino. The guy that you may see right here, Daniel J. Petruzzi, who wrote this memoir, My War Against the Land of My Ancestors. He was a guy who was in love with the Italian art and culture. He loved the Renaissance. He loved everything about Italy, despite the fact that he had no family over there. And he said that I'm very close to the Italian population, but the decision to bomb Monte Cassino was the right decision to be undertaken because our goal was to advance northbound and to eliminate the Germans. So in other words, you sort out your, torn identity, being an American soldier fighting in Italy, even undertaking very tough decisions such as destroying part of the Christendom. Daniel Petruzzi said, I'm a Catholic. I'm a true believer in the Catholic God. But if I have to sacrifice Monte Cassino, that's fine, because it's part of the game. Many other Italian Americans could decide to fight in Italy for a number of reasons. Curiosity for Italy. I'm meeting Italy for the very first time. Adventure. I want to be part of an adventuring game. Or I want to destroy fascism in Italy. That's another story. I know that Italians are suffering under fascism, so I want to be part of the coalition to liberate Italy. Now, maybe you know this guy, Tony Vaccaro, a very famous photographer. He lived in New York. He was a veteran of World War II, a great guy. He passed away a couple of years ago, if I'm not wrong. He was turning 100, so he was quite old. I had the chance 10 years ago to interview him, and it was a fantastic experience to me. When I'm talking about this story, writing this book to me is a personal experience because I, let's say, created some friendships with veterans or sons and daughters of these veterans. So we had personal relationships. So it was something personal to me. So it was not only to make a work, to make a job. It was a matter of creating interpersonal relations. And Tony Vaccaro was a person that really got close to me. When I asked him to be interviewed, he immediately replied, "Yes, I want." And he decided to run the interview in Italian because he was born and raised in Italy and eventually arriving in the United States as an American citizen only when he was 18 years old. So his Italian was extremely fluent, and we spoke for a couple of hours in Italian. Tony Vaccaro became a very famous, a worldwide famous photographer, so you can check for his war photographs. They are absolutely fantastic. He didn't fight in Italy. He did fight in France and in Germany, but I asked him, Tony, you are pretty much half Italian. What about if you had to fight in Italy and fighting against someone from Molise, your region? He replied, too bad for the Italians. They were on the wrong side of history. So if I had to fight Italians, I would shoot Italians because I was an American. So patriotism was again a main issue for guys like Tony. And pretty much fighting in Italy means sometimes to be annoyed by the Italians, such in the case of Edward J. Denari, who wrote his memoir Like a Mind to Keep, Stories from Life. Denari was employed in Italy, and he was usually surrounded by Italians because he could speak Italian. He had somatic traits that claimed his Italian ethnicity, but he was not happy about that. He said, I was an American. I don't want to be spoiled as an American because the Italians just always try to get close to me. I mean, I understand they are suffering. There are people who are happy to have me here helping them. But at the very same times, I don't like to be perceived as an Italian because I'm a full-fledged American. But the cases of Denari, such as Denari, was a minority of cases because the majority of Italian Americans played a major role in reconstructing a relationship between the Italian population and the occupiers. So Italian Americans created very strong bonds, very strong friendship relationship from the time of before the invasion of Sicily, when the Americans were in North Africa and took prisoners of war, Italian prisoners of war. When these people realized that American soldiers could speak Italian and were Italian Americans, immediately they asked for some sort of friendships. So, it's like to say that they perceive it to be part of the same national community. You are an American, you are dressing in an American uniform, but you speak Italian, you have Italian somatic traits, you have an Italian culture, so we are pretty much close and friends. And relationships were particularly strong. During the invasion of Italy, the Italian Americans played a major role in reconnecting with the Italian population. You are an occupier, so you are perceived as someone who could be pretty much problematic. You can be a danger for our safety. But Italian Americans helped to reassure the role of Americans in Italy for the simple reason that they could speak Italian, they have an Italian cultural trait, and so on. Italian Americans played a major role in particular within the so-called OSS, the Office of Strategic Services.
Oh, yeah.
As you may know, the Office of Strategic Services was the forerunner of the current CIA. So the agents of the OSS were running operations behind the enemy lines, so in the territory controlled by the fascists and the Nazis, and these people were running espionage, sabotage, and so on. Italian Americans played a major role in the OSS by the fact they could speak Italian, they were resembling Italian somatic traits, so they helped so much the Italian partisans, the majority of whom were communists. So the Americans at the time, the policymakers had some problems with the partisans because we were mostly communist. But the relationship between the Italian-American OSS agents and the Italian partisans was extremely cordial, was extremely good, because Italian Americans perceived these communist partisans as good fighters and someone who strongly believed that Italy had to be saved by fascism. Generally speaking, the OSS played a major role, as well as meeting relatives in Italian towns and villages. Italian Americans could get, by their own officers, military leaves. So when you have a break from fighting, you may decide that you can travel, you can ask to travel to the towns from where their relatives came from. So just imagine you are in Sicily. You don't have to fight, but your family come from a place close to, I don't know, Agrigento, wherever else. You decide you go there. So you visit your ancestral town and you may meet people over there, relatives or friends of your family. So these trips were not easy at all. Don't forget we are in a warfare, so routes cannot be that good to be traveled. But when these people arrived in these towns, was immediately a fest. When they disclosed that they came as Italian American and relatives came from that specific place, everyone was welcoming, was creating a sort of larger Italian communities to which they took part. And for them, it was a fantastic moment of rediscovering their own ethnic roots. So this practice was particularly facilitated by the US military forces for the simple reason that the Americans wanted to have Italy back on their side. They were already foreseeing a future with a pro-American Western bloc against the communists. And so in that sense, Italian Americans could play a major role in creating a sort of sentimental bond with the local population. So that's the reason why the military officers pushed so much for having these visits in these small towns and villages. Now, the relationship with women was particularly important. Don't forget how war brides married many American soldiers, and 1 out of 3 American soldiers were Italian Americans. So hanging out, dating Italian Americans was a way to be perceived as good girls, because at that time, as you may know, many women decided to sell their bodies as prostitutes to survive to soldiers. So in that sense, going out and dating non-Italian American soldiers was pretty much problematic, because you could be perceived as a prostitute, as an Italian lady. But if you dated an Italian American, you could be perceived as good lady, because the community could understand when this guy spoke in Italian. And the fact that he was an Italian American with an Italian culture could bring a sort of family connection, a cultural connection. So the relationship with women was particularly important, to the point that many movies set in Italy, many American movies set in Italy, just recount this idea of connecting between the connection between Italian American soldiers and women, such as The Story of G.I. Joe, a movie set in 1945, or more importantly, A Bell for Adano. There was a novel written by John Hersey. John Hersey was a war correspondent sent to Sicily, and he was in particular sent to the Sicilian city of Licata, where he met Frank Eugene Toscani, who was governing as a military authority that specific town. When he was back to the United States, Hersey decided to publish A Bell for Adano. It was a very successful book that it was eventually was translated in another famous film that you may see on the right. And in particular, Toscani was performed into the movie and into the novel by Major Giappolo that you may see right on the right. Major Giappolo was a guy who had a wild sentimental relationship with a local woman, but more importantly, he impersonated the exemplary good occupier. So he was the ethnic American military officers that was running in a very good way, applying social justice, the local community of Adano. So it was an exemplary a representation of the American democracy at work. We are democratizing the small town after 20 years of fascism. So this novel and this movie basically had a great success, and they are still utilized today by the military, the American military authorities, to depict the idea of being a good occupier, because as you may know, sometimes can be easy to occupy a country, but it's harder to occupy, to manage after the war, the country at large. Just look what happened in Iraq 20 years ago.
Matteo, I want to backtrack to the idea that it was a good way to meet girls for Italian American boys. I would have loved that possibility.
Everyone, I guess.
I'm assuming, did it end up with a high number of war brides and that marriages?
Yes, I don't have numbers at the moment, but Italy is definitely the country, the ex-enemy country that was producing more war marriages, because war marriages happened in Japan and Germany as well, so including an American soldier, but Italy was clear enough the place where you want to pick a local lady for a marriage. And many women went eventually overseas to live. The majority of them went overseas. Some of them had a very good life in the United States. Sometimes this lady had problems because they had to arrange to the new culture, the new lifestyle, and so on. A colleague of mine, Silvia Cassamagnaghi, wrote a fantastic book called something like Operation War Brides. I think has not been translated in English, unfortunately, but she recounts about this story of war brides that were definitely a part of the story, in which Italian Americans were definitely included, because many brooms were Italian Americans.
So war brides is a major theme here.
Yeah,
that's good. And Linda Holda mentioned that Tony Scariano, my great friend, was in SOS, as was from Chicago, and as was also Egidio Clemente, the editor of La Parola del Popolo. Fantastic stories there.
Yes, I know Scariano very well. I had a chance to read his memoirs. So he was a guy, a very interesting guy, who was part of the large story, as many others. And if I'm not wrong, he had a very successful life after war.
After the war, he ended up as an appellate court judge of Illinois, and he served as a state legislator.
You always have to remember how World War II was a turning point for many Italian Americans, because when they get back home, they could utilize the so-called GI Bill. So they got benefits for being veterans of the conflict. So they could have very good mortgages for purchasing new houses in the suburbs, so living Little Italies. They could afford right now to go to the university, or you could get a better occupation. So in other words, they became middle class.
After serving about almost 3 years average in the military, they had Americanized. They went through an Americanization process, And
Right.
so they were, it was hard to distinguish between Italian Americans and other Americans. They had the same experiences. And well, the GI Bill, of course, is a very big thing that pushed them into the middle class or allowed them
Don't,
to push themselves into the middle class.
don't forget how the majority of the baby boom generation didn't talk Italian because their fathers did not want to talk to them in Italian. So that's quite interesting in terms of Americanization after the war. You don't want to speak Italian because you perceive yourself to be a full-fledged American. So just speak English. That's
So
so
in part, that strategy worked for the parents deliberately not teaching Italian to their kids uh,
right,
did help Americanize, make them acceptable.
right. Okay, here I just put a few movie titles set in Italy. I don't want to talk about them. I just want to arrive to the end of my presentation by talking a little bit about memorialization, because over the last few years, there is a tendency to memorialize the experience of Italian Americans in World War II. Uh, a good suggestion, actually, a couple of suggestions I give to you on YouTube. You find this fantastic documentary realized by an Italian filmmaker. It's in English or in Italian. It's a Roman guy, Marco Curti, who realized Fighting Paisanos. He recounts the story of 4 Italian Americans who fought in Italy in World War II. So it's definitely a great story. And that's helped a lot to memorialize that experience. It was channeled on Rai TV, so on the national Italian TV. So it had a quite good, following. The other story, very interesting, by a friend of mine, Mark Pedri, who is a filmmaker by Wyoming. When you think about Wyoming, you are not pretty much thinking about Italians, but Pedri realized this fantastic awarded documentary, Their Sirs, that recount the story of Mark's grandfather, who was fighting as an Italian American with the American forces in France, and he was taken as prisoner and led to Germany for a number of months. When his grandfather passed away, Mark found all his memorabilia, his letters, and so on. So he decided to reconstruct the story of his grandfather by going to France and Germany by bike during the winter time and getting by every single place where his grandfather has been taken as prisoner during the war. So it is a very emotional documentary that I'm suggesting to you, and that helps us to memorialize the story of Italian Americans. And talking about memorials, especially about Italy, there are a few places that I want to mention to arrive to my conclusions. The first one is a small town close to Le Cinque Terre that you may know has a touristic spot in Italy. The town is Amelia, close to La Spezia, is where 15 Italian American OSS members has been taken as prisoners by the Nazis and immediately executed. So they have been immediately killed as a war crime. A plaque that you may see right here just memorialized these people that had contributed to the full liberation of Italy and sacrificed themselves, and they were particularly subject to a war crime. And another plaque in Licata, the guy I was mentioning before, Frank Toscani, the guy who was alias Major Gioppolo, is still memorialized today in Licata because of his role in, managing the city of Licata. So the local people pretty much memorialize this guy who traveled back, if I'm not wrong, back in the 60s to rediscover the places where he had fought in World War II. But the places is where you pretty much can remember these soldiers are the 2 war American cemeteries in Florence and in Nettuno. If you pass through these fantastic cemeteries, you may realize how many graves have Italian surnames. So just recall the idea that these Italian Americans has passed through a country and sacrificed themselves for the full liberation of Italy. And just for arriving to the conclusion, you have mentioned it very gracefully at the very beginning about the exhibit that I and Francesco realized a few years ago. We were coming out from COVID pandemic, and we asked the US mission in Italy, so the American embassy, to finance a specific exhibition, a photographic exhibition, to pretty much memorialize Italian Americans who fought not only in Italy, but generally speaking in the world. So we collected over our years of research dozens of beautiful photographs that we might utilize in these installments. So we realized that this exhibition, thanks to the support, the financial support of the US mission, and let's say that the exhibit that is bilingual, is in English and Italian, was quite successful because we traveled not only in Florence, but we went to Rome for a few months, in Naples, in Capaccio Paestum, Pisa, Lucca. So it was quite followed by the Italian population.
Well, that's quite an achievement.
Yes, it is. It is. And we wanted to have it in English, especially because if you think about Florence, Florence is completely overwhelmed by American tourists. So we wanted to have an audience, of course, of Americans. Right now, the exhibition is stored somewhere. We hope in the future to get it back and to have it showed to the population, because it's a matter of heart for us, you know, because when I and Francesco think about the wartime, we always remember how, you know, the Italians were suffering a lot.
Yeah, we want that exhibit at the Casa Italia. Put us down for the first one in the U.S. We'll inaugurate it.
That would be great. If we got someone pay for that, would be great for sure. We can recreate it. I'm pretty happy about that. If you want to have it, I'm more than happy to have it.
Okay.
We have another exhibition that is right now in a museum up to the Gothic line up north Tuscany, not far away from my place. But this is our little contribute to our to this great story of Italian Americans in World War II. It's a matter of art for me, you know. It's a book I like it to write. It was a lot of sufferance to complete the book, but I really hope in the future to have it in an English draft. Thank you everyone for your kindness and for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Got some significant applause here. And now it's time for commentary and questions. And, you know, we're active in the, what do we call it? Oh, okay.
Maria Rosaria has a question.
Hello,
Okay.
buonasera, Matteo. That was excellent. Hello, Dominic. Hello, Jason. Yeah, I wrote a question in the chat, but I have a little more to say. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on this wonderful achievement. And
Thank
you
you.
brought back some memories, because I attended the Orientale in Naples.
Really?
And Dominic, it is a very prestigious university here in Italy. Okay. And you know, today there are lots of translators. Now they're working a lot on translation. Are you interested, Matteo, in translating the book now in English?
Yes, I am. I've already some talks with a great scholar based in California, that is Clorinda Donato, who said she has an excellent team of people translating. They have been awarded for their translating works over time. So we already started some conversation, but of course the problem is always money, because my university, unfortunately, is not that rich. They don't support full translation. So that's part of the story, unfortunately.
But we talked about volunteers in World War II. This is another expedition. If you should need anybody to help you, I am available.
Okay.
And if you trust, because Dominic knows very well that I collaborated with a group of friends on the translation of Italian Women of Chicago and Donna Italiana Chicago. So this time we could do a vice versa. If you should need my help, Dominic could give you my email, and I would gladly do that for you. It
Yeah.
would be an honor
By
for
the
me.
way, our book, Italian Women in Chicago, Donne Italiane a Chicago,
Okay.
has
That's
been
fantastic. Maria
published.
Rosaria, that's very
You
lovely.
can buy
Thank
it
you very
on
much.
Amazon for, I think it's 25 euros. But we're going to come to Italy soon, and we're going to have a book tour, and we'll sell it for 20 euros.
Sorry, there is some background.
Okay, so we have a little bit of feedback here.
Thank you,
Let's
Matteo. Thank you,
Thank you,
Dominic.
Maria Rosaria.
Okay, let's turn to our designated commentators, and let's go first to Peter Belmonte. Peter, what are some of your reactions to the presentation by Matteo?
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you, your crack staff there, for hosting this. And Matteo, I really appreciate, one, your command of the English language, and also your scholarship. It's gratifying to see Italians take an interest in this. Of course, I'm very interested in it also. And I just have a few comments. I agree with you, Matteo, that probably no one actively refused to go and serve in Italy. That would be unusual. It maybe happened. Certainly there were people who really had strong reservations. And when I interviewed about 50 men, maybe one or two had strong reservations, but all agreed with what you said. We're American soldiers, and this is what we're going to do. Probably those Italian soldiers would just as easily, slit our throat if they could. But the main thing is they would probably, they felt, hey, I'm not too thrilled about killing anybody, let alone Italians, but we're going to do what we have to do. And as far as that goes, one of the men I interviewed was Samuel Lombardo from my beloved Calabria. He was actually born in Calabria and came to the United States as a young man. And when I interviewed him, and I asked him, hey, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to call it Italian Americans World War II. He chided me. He said, don't call it Italian Americans. We're American soldiers. Of course, I had to call it Italian Americans anyway, because that's a topic. But that was his view, and I think that's kind of what most of those men felt. And and I want to harken back also to, as I did a lot of research on Italian American soldiers in World War I, and many of them actually after World War I went back to Italy, and after World War I, in Paris, the American soldiers formed the American Legion, which was a group for American veterans of World War I. It's still going, and it's expanded to war veterans in general. But there was actually so many soldiers went back to Italy. There was actually a branch of the American Legion in Italy, at least one branch. They would periodically assist those veterans in getting benefits, getting bonuses that were due them, or their widows getting the pensions that were due to them. And that went all the way through and up to World War II. And I'll ask you also, do you know whatever happened to this American? I can imagine these American soldiers in Italy, and all of a sudden, they can't attend the American Legion, convention or what have you. I just is curious, and it just shows you the attraction of those soldiers, those first generation soldiers, World War I, to Italy. Probably less of an attraction for World War II soldiers, because as you say, most of them were born in America. They wanted to be American. They weren't going to move back to Italy or anything like that. And anyway, that's just another thing. And if you care to comment on that's good also. And the final thing is there must have been thousands of Italian American soldiers who served in Italy when, like you said, when you think about Sicily, the invasion of Sicily, Anzio, Salerno, all that. You'd have to look at every single roster for a ship and for a unit, to pull Italian American surnames, or Italian surnames. But okay, anyway, those are my general comments.
Okay, and can we have some reflections too, Matteo, on the living conditions during World War II in Italy and how that impinged on the relationship between Italian American soldiers and the Italian people. Well, think about that, and let's go to Gary. Gary Mormino, my friend from originally from East St. Louis. Gary did a dissertation on the Italian American Hill in St. Louis, and he also wrote with George Fozzetta about Ybor City, which had a large contingent of Italian immigrants in it, and he published the book, The Impact of World War II on Italian Americans in 2002. That was part of the proceedings of a conference on Italian Americans, the American Italian Historical Association. Gary, what are your takes on these things?
First of all, I'm anxious to read your book. A beautiful presentation. Bravissimo, bravissimo. World War II is deeply imprinted in me. I'm a child of a baby boomer of World War II. My father, Ross Anthony Mormino, joined the Seabees after Pearl Harbor, and came home, married my mother. We lived in a community called Wood River, Illinois, which is across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. And there was a large Sicilian population from Alia, Sicily. I think I told you before, I had the pleasure and pride of being a Fulbright scholar to Italy in 1980, where I taught at the University of Rome. And my landlord and I suppose distant cousin was a World War II veteran from Italy. He was captured at Stalingrad by the Russians and spent 3 years in a prison camp. And in 1945, he tells the story, a Russian guard came and said, "You're free," and walked away. And several hundred Italians, most of them Sicilian, began walking from Siberia to Sicily. That's a long walk, by the way. And he was illiterate, could not send a telegram, even if he knew how to send a telegram. And when he finally arrived, probably 6-7 months later, his mother fainted. She was sure he was dead. But I heard so many great World War II stories from Zio Giuseppe there. My father joined the Seabees not because he feared he would be fighting against his relatives, but because he was a 4th grade dropout and wanted to get a better job. So when he came home, he got a job at the Standard Oil Refinery, where, by the way, there's a great Mormino family story. When he was in 4th grade, he was in a class at St. Bernard's Catholic School, and Mother Eulalia asked him, or Rosalino, please lead the class in the Lord's Prayer. And he began, "Our Father, who works at the Standard Oil Refinery," which is the wrong answer. And he was kicked out of school, never returned. So World War II was the greatest adventure in his life. I've been incredibly lucky. I did my dissertation on the Hill. Matteo, have you ever been to the Hill in St. Louis?
No,
Locals called it Dago Hill, but it was the Hill. The most famous World War II veteran, I mean, I don't think anyone can top the most famous World War II veteran from the Hill, Peter Lawrence Berra, better known as Yogi Berra.
Yeah, I know him.
And, also a 4th grade dropout, by the way. And Yogi, I interviewed him, told me that he won a medal at D-Day. He was in a rocket boat firing at the cliffs in Normandy and was injured, badly injured, and refused a Purple Heart because his mother would have found out about it in a telegram, and he didn't want his mother to know that he had been injured. But Yogi did very well when he returned. I'm not writing much about Italian immigrants now. I'm writing about Florida, but in many ways, it's all about Italians in Florida. So here's a stunning statistic. In 1940, Florida was the smallest state in the American South, smallest state with 1.9 million people. Today, Florida is the fourth largest state in the nation with 24 million people. There's probably a million Italian Americans in Florida. Most of them retirees. 1 million. That's the estimate. They're dying, of course, because the World War II generation. I mean, do the statistics. If you were 18 years old in 1945, the last year of the war, you were born in 1927. You're fast approaching 100 years old. You're in your 90s now. Those are the youngest World War II veterans. I can remember when I was in Italy in 1990. There was constant interest in Italian TV on the Italian war veterans who had been captured and sent to Russia during World War II, and who managed to come back. So I do a lot of talks at American Legion, places like that, and I'm amazed how many Italian vets come up and we talk about the war. I've got one of the greatest Pearl Harbor stories I ever heard. So I'm interviewing a woman named Maria Passetti. She was a classical dance and ballet instructor, and she tells me on December the 7th, 1941, even though she's Italian, she went every Sunday. There was a tea dance at the El Centro Español. Ybor City in Tampa, Florida, had several immigrant groups. Hence the El Centro Español. They had Spaniards, but Spaniards from Asturias and Spaniards from another region in Italy. They also had a large Cuban population and a fairly interesting, not large, but a Black Cuban population that lived amid the quote white immigrants, although the locals would not have classified Italians as white. So every Sunday she went to, after Mass, she went to the tea dance at El Centro Español. And her great aunt always came as a guide and to see if she was dancing with someone she shouldn't be dancing with. And so that at 12:30 that day, Don Francisco, who's the conductor of the orchestra, comes out and announces the Japanese have bombed the Navy stocks at Pearl Harbor. And of course, there's great rush. Most people have no idea where Pearl Harbor is. And then they make an announcement. Half the men who were dancing with the Latinos were wearing military uniforms. There's several military bases in Tampa, and they were told wait outside for the buses to pick them up. And the young girls went to the balcony and they were just crying as the buses were leaving with their boyfriends. Just a great story. Let me talk a little bit about St. Louis. St. Louis was not a major immigrant city for new immigrants. It was a major city for Germans in the mid-19th century, but it had a relatively small Italian population, but an interesting one, and it's called The Hill. Matteo, have you ever been to The Hill?
No, not yet.
It's still a pretty amazing community. Again, Joe Garaggio and Yogi Berra. And I decided when I was in grad school, I needed a dissertation topic. And I think I saw a documentary on the Hill, and I lived about 30 miles from the Hill. So I decided to go over and take a look at it. I did not even know where it was in St. Louis. So I think I know I'm on the Hill. And I'm sitting there in my car, and a big guy, I mean, burly guy, about 250 pounds, comes up, taps his baton on my windshield. And I say, "Excuse me, is this Dago Hill?" Which is what we called the hill. He picks me up by the back of my shirt, lifts me off the seat. It says, "Kid, you better be Italian." I was hooked on the hill. And the problem was there were almost no archives on the hill. And I'm thinking my advisor is going to kill me. I decided to do this as a dissertation, but didn't check this out. And my wife and I are living on the hill, and I don't know what to do. And I noticed about half the community was senior citizens. So I bought a cheap tape recorder and started interviewing people, kind of Studs Terkel style. And the greatest interviews I had were with World War II vets, but also a woman told me she brought over 3 of her friends, and they were all picture brides. And around 1905, 1910 it might have been, she remembers a knock on her door, and she can hear the conversation but can't see them. And it was a woman showing her mother a picture of him as a war bride, as a worker in St. Louis. And she said, "He's the biggest shot that works for the railroad." And she went along with a dozen other women with chaperones. They came by boat to New York, trained to St. Louis, and they were all married the next day because it had been arranged marriages. I mean, and that and the World War II stories will always remind me of the hill. And Matteo, thank you for bringing back some of those memories.
Thanks to you.
Gary, interesting you should mention the hill. We're having the game of our lives next week as our Sabato Culturale event. And we've got the one of our volunteers, Rosemary Orlando, worked on the film as a producer, and we're having a Zoom with Angelo Pizzo, the writer of and the Game of Their Lives, also the writer of Hoosiers and Rudy. He wrote all 3 of those movies, the great sports movies of our generation and beyond. So we're going to celebrate the hill next week.
Hey, I bet none of you realize this, but I'm interviewing a guy named Frank Calcaterra, who's a mortician. And he tells me that he was a goalie on the 1950 U.S. Olympic team and defeated Great Britain in what's considered the greatest upset in soccer history. 4 of the players on the U.S. Olympic team in 1950 were from the Hill.
Yes.
I mean, that is astounding if you think about it. Soccer was even bigger than baseball. And Yogi Berra was an avid soccer fan. Of course,
Rosemary Orlando has joined me, and she's the chair of that event, and she's actually going to do some presentation in that event. I'm not getting myself here we go. Rosemary's here. She's
hello. I wanted to mention that in 1993, I work on films in Chicago and all over the United States, and I was called to work on this movie, The Game of Their Lives. And it was set in St. Louis, so a number of Chicagoans went to St. Louis, and I had no idea how many Italians were in the St. Louis area, but I learned so much. It was so exciting because, like you said, the generation of Italians, nobody moved from the neighborhood. The adults who lived there and they grew up and had families, they pretty much ended up staying there. And then I met all the men who were chosen to represent the team, and they were in their probably 80s, and they ended up featuring them at the end of the movie. And they were just wonderful, and the whole community got together, and They were great.
Did they get to attend that 1950s game? Oh, the game where it started. It's a retrospective.
Right.
The film is a retrospective.
The actors who played the main characters, they invited them along on the set, and everybody was the whole community got together.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and then they featured them at the end of the movie. So when you see the movie, you'll see all the main men who they represented. They featured them.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it was a great experience, and to this day, people are still talking about being in the movie.
Okay, we're in question time, and Matteo is open to questions concerning his very fine presentation. And if there's anyone who's online who wants to pose a question, unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
I believe Linda had a question or would like to hear more about some of the daily life of Italians during the war.
Yeah, Matteo, can we come back to you about the daily life of Italians during World War II and how that impinged on the relationship between Italian-American soldiers and the Italian population?
So you mean daily life at the war front or on the domestic front?
Well, I suppose it's the domestic front, the war-torn Italy and the shortages and all of that sort of thing, the deprivation that occurred during the war years.
Yeah, okay. I mean, when you were in Italy, actually, you had to fight likewise all the other soldiers, so it didn't make so much difference according to the ethnicity. But what is more important to me is that if you were an Italian American, you could try to find out some sort of friendly relationship and even sentimental relationship with someone from the Italian population. So you exploited the fact that you were able to speak in Italian or at least a dialect. So that helped a lot. And there are historians, especially in Italy, who says that, Italian Americans were in search of, let's say, some worth, some friendship, some care, so they could give their material assistance to the Italian population. In return, they get some friendships and sometimes some love. So let's say that Italian Americans daily live pretty much a different experience comparing to those who are not of Italian background. So it makes to me a basic difference, because if you speak Italian, you can interact with the local population. If you are not someone able to speak in Italian, you could have more problems. So let's say that the most emblematic case for non-Italian speakers was to connect with women, especially if they were looking for sex, pretty much. Conversely, the Italian Americans could develop a wider sense of relationship with the Italian population. So that's actually what I think is more important. Language was something that really reconnected the Italian American servicemen to the Italian population. The other Americans could not get that closer relationship, so they tended to stay all together. There are some cases for the Italian Americans of people having meals with Italian families, so just consider themselves part of an enlarged family. So they share this Italian character at large.
Okay.
So I hope I answered it.
Okay, thank you.
May I perhaps respond to Peter's and Gary's?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, I like their comments, and I start with Gary. I mean, I was fascinated by his comment by talking about the Hill as a place where you could not get many information. This is something that was pretty common to myself as well. You start from scratch, you don't know where to get information, where you get sources is. You have been lucky enough to interview veterans, not in my case so many, unfortunately. But I think the ethnic press was a valuable source to start from. And indeed, we started from the Progresso Italo-Americano, but we also had huge problems in collecting sources from the archives. We have been in the National Archives and Record Administration in College Park in Maryland, and it's a mess. You cannot really get information, especially because ethnicity was not that tracked. So you could not reconnect to the Italian Americans. But we worked harder and working in tandem together with Francesco, we could split the work. And so in that sense, we have been lucky enough. About the comment, the Peter's comment, he rightly enough connect World War One to World War II. I think is pretty important to reconnect the two experiences. And he mentioned the role of the American Legion. Don't forget how the American Legion played a major role with the Italian veterans of World War One, so not immigrants, people living in Italy, till the very end of the 30s. There is a trip by the American Legion veterans traveling to Europe in 1938, and they came to Rome when the relationship between Italy and the United States were fading away. They were collapsing. We were close to the outbreak of World War II. But the connection, the veteran connection between the former allies was particularly important. So that's something that is important to mention. Don't forget how veterans of World War One living in the United States have been subject to deprivation of liberties. Many have been interned, especially because they were perceived as a military problem. They were people trained to use arms. In that sense, the military authorities, such as, the civil authorities, such as the FBI, perceived the veterans as somehow problematic. But veteran associationism is quite important even after World War II, because many Italian Americans, as Americans, decided to join again the American Legion or the Veteran Worldwide Association, or even a specific ethnic association that was the Italian American Veteran Association that was running for a few decades. I think they disappeared. No, I mean, it's still existing today.
Yeah, not so much, but
well, in some places they are running their branch.
New Jersey.
New Jersey is pretty good. I think Ohio as well. They are still running a good
Maybe
membership.
Connecticut and Rhode Island.
I can tell you in my book, there is a section dedicated to that specific association that had a lobbying activity pretty active during the Cold War. They were pretty much anti-communist, and they wanted communists to disappear from Italy. So they were working with the American Congress to push activities, anti-communist activities in Italy as well. So, the veteran associations are quite remarkable during the Cold War, and I think they are worth to be mentioned. So thank you very much for your comments.
As far as social life is concerned, the veterans groups in my hometown in Chicago Heights, they kind of set the scene for the dinner dances and charitable events and so forth. And so there were serving in World War II gave you access to being a member of the veterans organizations, and almost it was every person who meant anything or counted in the town was a member of those associations, those veterans organizations, and they could get ahead in their business, get ahead in the social pecking order, maybe in politics as well. So it was an important, I think, social stepping stone, membership in veterans organizations for Italian Americans after World War II.
I can tell you 10 years ago, I was in New York. I was running a fellowship at the New York University, and I went to one of these veteran social clubs in Queens, in Corona, Queens. And there were still Italian American veterans alive, and they used it to get together every single day just to playing cards or talking or having a coffee together. This sort of social life connected to their own veteran association, to their veteran experience, still pretty much evident. And they connected with veterans of the Vietnam War as well. So, wars across generations, different experiences, but still being part of the same community of veterans.
Okay, yeah. Those our veterans in Chicago Heights retreated into Catholic War veterans, and then, like so many, because of the aging process, they are challenged these days
Sure.
with possible extinction. Our intern George has a question. George?
Yeah. So I was just gonna ask, do you know who had the highest rank for all the Italian American veterans?
Well, I think it was actually John Basilone. I mean, the highest rank, I'm sorry, the highest rank. There were not many high ranks because, Italian Americans were not considered good enough to get high ranks. But the highest...
Oh, we have an answer. General Daniel Noce.
It was from World War II, Peter?
Well, that's from Peter. Peter, come on.
You know much better than me. Please go ahead. I cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Yes, he was, as we speak, I'm doing a, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Yeah, fine.
I'm doing a quick Google search, but he's the only, as far as I can remember, he's the only Italian general officer during the war. There were, of course, officers. There were men who had stayed in the military since World War I also. But yeah, he was a lieutenant general. He was born in 1894 actually in Denver. His father he founded the first Italian newspaper in Colorado. But anyway, yeah, he was a general in the war. And that was unusual. I mean, there weren't many. And most of them, as Matteo says, you were drafted and you served as an enlisted man. And that's it. But there were officers, and there were at least the one general officer.
Well, your next project, Peter, is to write the history of Italians in the U.S. military.
Yeah, I'm chipping away. I'm chipping away at all that.
I'd like to see that in 2 years. And we'll publish it at Casa Italia if nobody else will publish it.
All right.
You could probably get a better deal somewhere else, but we'll do it.
That sounds good.
I must confess I didn't know about Noce. I mean, I thought no Italian American generals were present in World War II. So thank you. That's particularly good. We worked on ranks. Sorry?
He must have been nuts.
Noce.
Okay.
We have a question here from our audience. So step up closer and get on camera. On camera on this side.
My name is Vince DeVito. I have served in U.S. Navy, and I was wondering.
Sorry, get close to the mic because I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
My name is Vincenzo DeVito. I served in U.S. Navy Reserve, and I was wondering how many Italian Americans served in the Navy, not so much the Army.
Okay, got it. It's not easy to say because there are not proper figures, but I would say that they were much less than in the U.S. Army, because the Navy at the time were more selective, and in that sense, they could not always appreciate Italians. So they would prefer to have, let's say, Anglo-Saxon Americans rather than ethnic Americans. I don't have proper figures, but I could say that the U.S. Navy Italian Americans were not so many. But unfortunately, I cannot tell you an exact number.
There's also Navy Air. You know what Navy Air is?
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
There's also such a thing as Navy Air where you train, they train Navy to fix planes or work with airplanes. But that was not the case in Italy.
Okay. Well, that's well. They could have chosen Italians as cooks. Why not?
Well, it may happen. Who knows?
Okay. Well, I think if you have a closing comment, Matteo, I think I speak for everyone in the audience when I thank you very much for this learned discussion, and I hope that we can make even more of a contribution to the publication in English of your book, Soldiers and Countries.
So Dominic, I just want to say again, thank you to you and the Casa Italiana for your generosity to host me, and it was just great to talk to you. And thanks to Gary's and Peter's as well for their time. I mean, it's Saturday, so you may have something else better to do with your family rather than listening to this poor guy from overseas. So, but anyway, I really appreciate your time and generosity. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience.
Bravissimo.
Well,
Grazie.
thank you very much. And so long to everyone. If you have a question, pass it on. We'll try to keep the thing going. Okay.
Ciao Matteo, ciao, grazie, grazie
Bye,
tanto.
buonasera, presto. Dai, thank you.
Buongiorno a tutti,
Avanti.
ciao.
Have a good day. Bye.
Avanti.
Bye. And
Thank you, Dominic, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Don Domenico, great job.
Thank you.